from oneskyastrology, and I'm here to look at the lunar cycle starting on April 22nd, 2020. I want to look at the pulse of the quarter moons, the full moon, and even forward to the next new moon. And I want to do all this from the point of view of true sidereal astrology, also known as constellational or astronomical astrology, which looks at things as they are in the actual skies. So this is like looking at the real skies as if we were looking through a telescope, not using a zodiac. A lot of people don't know this, but a zodiac is actually a sort of approximation. It's a simplification, and it's a little bit artificial. When you look in the real skies, you'll see that the constellations are different sizes. This is different from mainstream forms of astrology, so especially in the West, in the tropical tradition, I think most people think this is happening in Taurus, the sign of Taurus. But this is an ancient and universal form of astrology where all of our ideas about our star signs come from. Watching the actual stars, not the approximate zodiac that came later. For now, I want to say that one of the ways that changes things is that this new moon here is happening in the stars of Aries. So, like I said, this is different from all forms of mainstream astrology, even Vedic, and For more on that, check out True Sidereal or Constellational Astronomical Astrology. So the last lunation originated in Pisces, where this lunation originates in the stars of Aries. The last full moon was in Virgo, and the last new moon was in Pisces. So the sun has been moving through Pisces and has just made its way about 1 degree 56 minutes, about 2 degrees into Aries. Now, Pisces and the last lunar cycle had the stamp, the theme of the spiritual mystery, of surrender, forgiveness, also of confusion. These are some of the themes of Pisces, some of the buzzwords. And as an influence, Pisces is really nebulous and mystical. It's very transcendental, and it's very diffuse, kind of dreamlike. Aries is a little bit of a different story. It's very direct, very personal, very blunt, very forward, very concerned immediately with what it wants and what it needs. When we look at this new moon alignment, we can see that it's making a conjunction, a pretty close conjunction to Uranus, and a wide conjunction to Aries in Pisces. So these are two pretty unpredictable influences that we'll look at a little more later. We also see a rolling conjunction. If we look at the rolling conjunction, we have a stellium that includes Mercury in Pisces as well. Another major feature of this new moon is that it's square. It's square to Saturn, and it's square to Jupiter. We can see that these two are conjoined, about to make the great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Capricorn. So we'll break this down step by step. We'll look at it piece by piece. And one thing I do want to point out is that during this cycle we have two major stelliums in the sky. If you want to include Mars, you can sort of include Mars up here in Capricorn, but I want to say this is the real action. This is where it's happening here on the Sag Cap cusp with Pluto, Jupiter, and Saturn, and here in Aries and Pisces with Uranus, the new moon, so the Sun-Moon conjunction, Eris and Mercury. So this is the new moon, and I want to take an extra look at this chart because this is going to act really as the template. It's going to set the stage, and it's going to hold the energy that pervades the lunar cycle. Not just because the sun is going to stay in Aries through much of the cycle, but just because this new moon is kind of like a natal chart for the lunar cycle, and we can read it like that. So one thing I want to notice is that these first degrees of Aries are where the story begins. It's one of the features of the Pisces-Aries cusp. It's a shift. The story of the zodiac starts in Aries. So here we move through the first house of selfhood, personhood, drive, determination, motivation. What's our basic impulse, that basic urge? And in Taurus, we encounter our stuff and our values. In Gemini, we start to communicate. So we've started to see movement toward an other. Gemini is also where we organize information, so it's still pertaining to ourself. But then as we go through this cycle and around the wheel of the zodiac, we wind up in the Pisces, the area of Pisces in the 12th house, Neptune's territory, and this is almost an opposite force to Aries. It's almost opposite in that it represents the all, or the mystery, the big picture. So Pisces big picture, that movement represents the end of the story, this last story, that this is the story of our year in a lot of ways, and it's always starting in Aries with a new chapter, a new expression of the self, and the movement through the stages of individuation towards that union with the all that Pisces represents. So there's an extra sense of letting go here, of processing not just the last lunar cycle, but the last year. And as this new moon emerges, we start to see a new beginning. That's the Aries. And we start to see a new approach to personhood, Aries, a new sense of motivation and drive, all of this Aries territory, as we move as we close down and let go of and move out of an old cycle. And there may have been more reflection and winding down during the last cycle, especially toward the end of it. So plant your intentions for the month ahead with this new moon, but also plant your intentions for the astrological year ahead and the next chapter of your personal journey. So that's part of what this is expressing, the energy of Pisces-Aries cusp. Another key feature of this new moon is the Uranus conjunction. And Uranus is moving towards Hamal, which is Alpha Aries, the star that represents the the head of the ram. The head of the ram. This is the the budding mechanism, the very thick skull of the ram. And it's a very feisty influence. It's charged with a lot of explosive potential. So when Uranus is here, and the sun and moon are also widely conjoined to Eris, I think we can expect to see the unexpected. And I think we can expect to see a lot of dynamic potential for change and emergence, for growth and understanding here. We might explore new interests. We might develop our willpower and intention in unusual ways, maybe along new or unexpected avenues. We might find that the revolutionary vision that Uranus carries into Aries has the drive and the fire and the passion to really carry it out. So we may encounter new and unusual ways of thinking. We may have the drive and motivation to act on those, to explore those. This is the theme of Uranus in Aries. So conjoined to the Sun and Moon, this makes a pretty major influence. And lastly, one of the major things here that's happening in the Sagittarius Capricorn region of the sky is that Jupiter and Saturn are creeping towards conjunction. And when we have that square to the new moon, things start to get a little bit complicated. So we actually have both of those bodies square to the new moon. But if we look at this whole configuration, if we just take these two stelliums here, Uranus, Mercury, and friends, and this Saturn-Pluto group, including Jupiter, we have a lot of squares here. We have Uranus square Saturn, we have Moon square Jupiter and Saturn. We have the Sun squaring Jupiter and Saturn. We have Aries squaring Pluto, Jupiter and Saturn, and we have Mercury squaring Jupiter and Pluto. So this gets complicated and layered really quickly. And I want to say that the general signature here in the square is one of obstacles that are really nobody's fault. Obstacles that are just inherent in how things are. And I want to say that the major thing happening here is with the Sun and Saturn. And one of the reasons for that is because the square is so close, as opposed to this Jupiter square, which is almost 7 degrees. The Sun square Saturn is to 1 degree, 45 arc minutes, so it's very close. But one of the other reasons for that is that Sun square Saturn is a really notoriously difficult transition. There may be with this square, this stellium square up to each other, a newly emerging sense of self and purpose, of drive and motivation, but it's likely going to be at odds. It's likely going to be at odds with the power structure. It's likely going to be at odds with ideas around conformity and the tests that are almost promised by the Saturn square Moon inner tests, Saturn square Sun outer tests, difficulties to navigate, obstacles to overcome. And it's at odds with issues that have to do with Jupiter too, around hope, optimism, overreaching. A Jupiter square implies that we have the option and the opportunity to kind of go too far, get too excited, maybe with a new moon in Aries, get too into ourselves, maybe too wrapped up in ourselves. There can be a lot of expressions here. I don't want to give anything textbook and make it sound like that's going to be a cookie cutter experience that we're all going to have. But these are the energies. These are the energies when you have Jupiter and Saturn square the Sun and Moon. In fact, Sun square Saturn is it can really represent a turning point, but it usually represents a turning point where we feel forced and our hands are forced and we feel like it's just something has to give. It can be very uncomfortable, and you can look at these transits and see that these are times when people often feel that the world is against them. When Saturn square to the Sun, it can feel there can be feelings of discouragement, feelings of isolation, feeling that things are stacked against them. For anyone experiencing this transit, so we're gonna collectively go through that, and the good news here is It's only a phase. So what the call is for is to take responsibility for our own emotional reactions, and this period is really likely to highlight any emotional immaturity. Aries has an immature streak because it hasn't gone through those stages of individuation and maturation yet, and Saturn squares, Jupiter squares, Pluto squares all imply that this is really going to highlight anywhere where we're not mature. Saturn, where we're immature. Aries. Blaming others for our bad mood is only going to make things worse and could put really important relationships at risk. So always look to yourself first during this phase, and be very hesitant. I advise being very hesitant to blame, but be inquisitive really, and remember that this is a collective influence, that we're all we're all going through this together, from the point of view of Saturn and the recent Saturn-Pluto conjunction and the planetary effects that it's had. For those that don't know, that happened right around the time of the emergence of the novel coronavirus and the global spread of it, and all of this lockdown and new Saturnine governmental measures and so on, all of this. So right now we're Sun and Moon, we're square to all that, pretty close square, and there's some difficulty here. There's some difficulty integrating. That's almost promised, and that makes sense. That's not hard to see. In other regions of the sky, in other news, Venus and Mars are happy. Venus is happy because she's at home in her own stars. Mars is exalted in Capricorn, I believe, although I'm actually not 100% on that. I'm pretty sure I remember that. And they're trying up to each other. So there may be a strong sense here of appreciating Venus, the drive to help others or be with the group in this. That's Capricorn's thing. Capricorn is, I often like poo-poo Capricorn as conformist, but it's actually that group effort, that getting together, that getting on the same page. So Mars here, the drive to do that, we're likely to appreciate that, and there may just be some ease here in this new moon signature with Mars trine Venus. It could have to do with relating to others. It could have to do with the ease of expression of our own drives to express our own vital energies. And moving forward to the waxing quarter moon, we see that the moon has entered its own stars of Cancer and is making an opposition to Saturn in its own stars of Capricorn. And this is T-squared by the Sun, Uranus, Mercury conjunction in Aries. So this is an interesting signature. We have Saturn and the Moon very strong. This is going to continue the theme of the Saturn-Moon square. This is going to continue that Saturn square theme, but we're going to be empowered here to use our higher knowledge, Mercury, Uranus, to bring that to bear on the situation and any opposition that may express itself as blame, as othering, as shoving that finger out there and saying, you did this. That's always the problem with oppositions, and a Moon-Saturn opposition can be really difficult, really challenging emotionally. So, making our way through this as Uranus creeps towards Hamal, and the cardinal stars are activated, as we see Aries and Cancer. We will have the full moon in Libra, and the waning quarter moon in Capricorn. So we do see the axis here, the dynamic axis created by the fourth harmonic, the stress signature, the energetic potential of the lunar cycle, the squares, the opposition, the quarter moons, and the full moon, are all happening. The signature, the main signature here is in the cardinal stars. So this is a theme, especially of new beginnings, echoed by that Aries placement of the new moon. All the cardinal signs are really about the start of new cycles. Very accentuated this lunar cycle. Just kind of want to point that out and move a little more quickly to the full moon. And the full moon in Libra is the crest of a wave. It's the expression of the harvest of the cycle. So this is dealing with the theme of Libra, and this polarizes things along the Aries Libra axis because the sun is still in Aries. And we see that opposition. So we're going to have that tension between Aries and Libra, and that's the tension of self, what's good for me, what are my interests, and other, what do they need, what do others need, what do, especially people in my one-on-one relationships, how am I relating? This is the big question with the Aries Libra axis. How am I, Aries, relating Libra? So we're learning through our process of relationship, we're learning about ourselves, and we're dealing with the other. Anything we've othered, anything we other, anything we project is going to come to bear on this situation. So all of that in the context of the new moon and the Saturn squares could be about authority figures. Really easy to see that here. It could be about power structure. It could be about with Jupiter. Jupiter is the philosopher. So it just could be having to do with Jupiter's also that bigger picture, that global view. So seeing all the different ways that people get on. The sun has actually moved out of its squares to Jupiter and then Saturn at this time. So by the time of the full moon, we're actually going to be in what looks like a trine to Pluto with the sun, and Mercury trine Jupiter. So there may be a lot of easing up through the course of this cycle, although that basic template remains the context in which we will consider the rest of it. The sun and moon are supported by trines and sextiles to the outer planets, the sun especially here with the just mentioned Pluto trine, and the moon with a Neptune trine. And this could be a really intuitive time. The intuition there is Neptune trine moon. That's a very sensitive, very intuitive time of working with others. That's that Libra moon. We can become empowered here with this Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. Everything's about personal power. So we're always developing here this personal power. And how are we developing this? Working with others to develop our personal power. We want to overcome any limitations. We're going back to the new moon here because that's the context of this. Those limitations, those squares, especially that Saturn square. We're going to overcome limitations to expressing our true self and our unique genius. It's Uranus conjunct the new moon. And self-expression in general, that Aries moon. And through the course of this, as Uranus moves towards Hamal, we're going to be dealing with bursts of energy, explosive energy, with the sun in Aries and Uranus subject to that stellar influence of the head of the ram. There's likely to be a lot of explosions. So I'm delighted to see for this full moon that Neptune is exerting its Pacific influence from its own stars of Pisces and that it's coming to bear on the lunar expression by this nice trine, which should be pretty pacifying. And by the time of the full moon, this is a much more peaceful signature than the new moon. So we can move on to that last quarter now, and the last quarter is in Capricorn with Saturn in domicile. So the Sun has also moved into Taurus with Venus in domicile. And what that means is that Venus is at home in her own stars, associated as she is with Taurus, and Saturn ruling Capricorn likewise. So there's a strengthening here of the influence of those stars on the luminaries. So this, as we wind this down, as we see the final quarter moon, the waning quarter moon, this is a time to process, a time to reflect, a time to look back and see what have we done, what would we like to do better, and begin to make way for the next cycle. Energetically, we'll be feeling a lull, and the waning energies at this time. And the Sun begins to trine here. If we look, the Sun begins to trine this power stellium, this signature of power here in Cap Sag, Saturn, Jupiter, Pluto. And it'll maintain that trine until the next new moon, which happens in Taurus. And that's good, because we may finally see with that next new moon some significant peace in regard to accepting our limitations in a way that had been hitherto challenged. And the reason I say that is because, unlike the squares, the challenge to this lunar cycle, the next lunar cycle is going to be the next lunar cycle on 22nd of May. So we're looking two new moons ahead now. A little sneak peek is going to be facing much more harmonious aspect to all of this power issues, the Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, the global situation. We're going to be in Taurus with Venus at home, conjoined Mercury, and the whole scenario just looks much more peaceful and at ease with the situation. So I think that this lunar cycle that we're looking at beginning April 2020, April 22nd, 2020, I think that this lunar cycle is likely to be one of integrating tension and challenge to a greater degree, but I think we're moving towards some harmony and flow, some maybe acceptance, and being grounded in the practical reality of the situation as we move towards the next new moon through this cycle. And then it'll be time for eclipse season all over again. that's April, May, June. I think the June new moon is an eclipse. So just a little glimpse ahead. I want to caution everybody, especially not to take things personally at this time, and to really remember that everybody's under the difficulty of these influences, that everybody is working with the same, an Aries new moon with a Uranus signature square to Saturn is a recipe for really being stirred up to change things, but that Saturn square means that we might face some restriction and some limitation in that regard, and this could be very frustrating. So I want to encourage everybody to channel your frustrations constructively. This is a new emergence. This is a new beginning, a new chapter, a new year, and I encourage you to remember to keep things in that context, that time frame. We're not just looking at intentions for the month, we're also planting with this new moon intentions for the year. All right, everyone. I think that's all I wanted to cover. I thank you for your time as always. I wish you the best. Thank you for watching, my friends. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.